A lieutenant commander? In my war room? Son, is this some kind of joke? The crowd of seasoned captains and commanders shifted on their feet, a ripple of nervous amusement passing through the hallowed space of the Fleet Command Operations Center. Commander Rex Thorne, a man whose voice was polished by years of barking orders from a destroyer's bridge, gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist towards the small, unassuming figure seated at a secondary console. I asked for a strategic analyst from the War College, not a glorified paper pusher fresh off her first tour. What's she going to do? Fetch us coffee while the real officers handle Global War Game 7. The laughter this time was more pronounced, a chorus of condescension that echoed off the massive, floor-to-ceiling holographic displays showing a world poised on the brink of conflict. They saw only the silver oak leaf on her collar, a rank respectable but utterly dwarfed by the eagles and stars that populated the room. They saw a woman of medium height, with her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, so severe it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. They saw no decorations on her uniform, no campaign ribbons, no outward sign of valor or experience. She was a blank slate, an anomaly in a room defined by history. But Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne, standing in the shadows of the upper gallery, a silent observer in the exercise he had personally authorized, did not laugh. He saw something else. He saw the way she sat, not rigid with nervous energy, but settled, her posture a perfect economy of motion. He saw her hands, resting on the console, not with hesitation, but with a placid familiarity, as if the cold plastic and glowing keys were extensions of her own nerve endings. And most of all, he saw her silence. As the laughter washed over her, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hayes offered no reaction. Her gaze remained fixed on the tactical display, her expression unreadable. She did not flinch, did not blush, did not even acknowledge the insult. Her quiet was not the quiet of fear or intimidation. It was the quiet of a mountain before an avalanche, a deep and profound calm that seemed to absorb the noise around it, rendering it meaningless. This was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of immense, unshakable competence. The Admiral leaned forward, a flicker of recognition in his old eyes, a memory stirring from a classified briefing held in a room with no windows years ago. He watched his son, a good officer but blinded by the arrogance of his own proven, conventional career, make the oldest mistake in the book. He was judging the weapon by its scabbard. He was judging the warrior by her rank. The Admiral knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this entire room of decorated veterans was about to be taught a lesson in humility by the quietest person in it. The simulation was codenamed Prometheus Unbound, a scenario so notoriously difficult, so deliberately stacked against their forces, that it was considered unwinnable. A lesson in managing defeat. But the Admiral had a suspicion he had just introduced a variable the simulation's designers had never accounted for. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type quiet professional in the comments below. Commander Thorne, basking in the afterglow of his own perceived wit, strode to the central command podium, his boots clicking with authority on the polished obsidian floor. He was a man built in the mold of naval tradition, tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that seemed permanently set for a fight. His career was a textbook example of excellence. Top of his class at Annapolis, distinguished service on multiple deployments, a rising star destined for his own command, perhaps even his own star one day. He believed in the hierarchy, in the clear and unambiguous lines of authority that made the Navy function. Rank was not just a symbol. It was a testament, a summary of a person's worth and experience. To him, Lieutenant Commander Hayes was an equation that didn't add up. She was an intrusion of the unproven into a sanctuary of the tested. He tapped the microphone, the sharp sound silencing the remaining murmurs. All right, people, listen up. Prometheus Unbound is live in 5. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, this scenario models a multi-front peer-state conflict. We have a carrier strike group isolated in the South China Sea, a cyber attack crippling our satellite communications, and a submarine wolf pack threatening Atlantic shipping lanes. The objective is not to win. Let me repeat that. You cannot win. The objective is strategic withdrawal, and asset preservation. It's a test of your discipline under fire, your ability to make hard choices and sacrifice pawns to save the king. His eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment with theatrical pity on Hayes. It requires experience. It requires a deep understanding of fleet-level doctrine. It's not a place for theoretical knowledge or textbook answers. The insult was clear, another targeted volley aimed at the silent woman at the side console. The other officers nodded grimly, their faces etched with the gravity of the challenge. They were the best and the brightest, the commanders of ships and squadrons, men and women who had felt the salt spray and the gut-lurching reality of combat decisions. They, too, saw Hayes as an outsider, a guest in their world. Her presence felt like a bureaucratic error, a misplaced piece of personnel. They saw her youth, her gender, her middling rank, and they built a narrative of inexperience around her. They filled her silence with their own assumptions, painting a portrait of a timid academic, someone more comfortable with data charts than with the brutal calculus of war. What none of them could possibly comprehend was that Hayes was not there to learn from them. She was there to test them. The simulation, in all its brutal complexity, was not a monster she was being thrown to. It was a world she intimately understood, a language she spoke with a fluency that would beggar their belief. She remained still, her breathing slow and even. She ignored the condescending glances and the palpable skepticism. Her focus was absolute, her mind already moving past the posturing and the politics, diving deep into the intricate web of the problem. She was tracing the invisible threads of data, mapping the enemy's probable lines of attack, feeling the rhythm of the coming storm. The room was filled with the sound of their confidence, the loud pronouncements of established experts. But the true professional, the one who held the key to the entire exercise, was cloaked in a silence they had tragically, fatally misinterpreted as weakness. The countdown clock on the main screen hit 0. The holographic map of the world bloomed with angry red icons. The simulation began not with a bang, but with a cascade of catastrophic failures. "Sir, we've lost satellite link with Strike Group Sierra," one officer called out. "Cyber intrusion detected in the Atlantic Fleet's comms network." "They're blind," another shouted. "Multiple submarine contacts, bearing 090 on the carrier. They're launching a full spread of torpedoes." The room, once a bastion of calm authority, descended into a controlled chaos. Voices overlapped, reports flew, and the faces of the seasoned commanders tightened with strain. Commander Thorne, in his element, began issuing orders, his voice cutting through the noise. "Evasive maneuvers, full starboard. Launch countermeasures. Give me a drone feed now. Reroute comms through the Australian ground station." His commands were sharp, precise, and perfectly aligned with established naval doctrine. He was playing the game exactly as it was designed to be played, managing the crisis by the book. He was making all the right moves for a losing battle, and they were losing. The red icons multiplied, swarming their isolated assets. The carrier strike group, the linchpin of their Pacific presence, was being systematically dismantled. On the main screen, the green icon of the flagship carrier, the USS Vigilance, turned a sickening yellow, then a critical red. Its damage report scrolled down the side of the screen. Multiple hull breaches, fire on the flight deck, engines at 30%. The room fell into a grim, tense silence. They were watching a multi-billion-dollar asset and the thousands of lives it represented being digitally annihilated. Thorne's face was a mask of frustration. He had done everything right, everything his training had prepared him for, and it wasn't enough. The scenario was living up to its reputation. It was a meat grinder. It was then, in the heart of that despair, that a single, quiet voice cut through the tension. "Permission to advise, sir," it was Hayes. She hadn't moved, her posture still one of serene focus. All eyes turned to her. Thorne, exasperated, waved a hand. "What is it, Lieutenant Commander? Have you figured out the coffee order?" The sarcasm was biting, but it lacked its earlier confidence. It was the desperate jab of a man who knew he was failing. Hayes ignored the jibe. Her eyes remained on her console. Sir, the enemy cyber attack is not a blanket assault. It's a surgical strike. They aren't trying to deafen us. They're trying to funnel our communications. They've left a single, antiquated satellite frequency open. It's a trap, Thorne scoffed. It's a ghost channel, Lieutenant Commander. Probably a glitch in the simulation. It's too slow, too insecure. Using it would be suicide. Hayes's fingers moved across her keyboard, a blur of precise, economical motion. A new window opened on the main screen, a complex string of code scrolling rapidly. It's not a glitch, sir. It's a honeypot, but it's also a key. The encryption they're using on that channel has a flaw, a recursive loop that can be exploited. We can't talk through it, but we can use it to talk to their network, a beat of silence. The concept was so alien, so outside the realm of conventional naval strategy, that no one knew how to react. It wasn't about fleet movements or missile trajectories. It was something else entirely. She was looking at the board and seeing a different game. Sir, she said, her voice still a calm, level monotone. If you authorize a data packet injection through that ghost channel, I can trigger a cascade failure in their submarine guidance systems. It will give the Vigilance a 30-second window to deploy countermeasures and escape the kill box. Commander Thorne stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the suggestion. It was insane. It was a 1-in-a-million shot based on a theoretical exploit that had no place in practical fleet command. It was the kind of high-risk, high-reward gamble that got captains court-martialed, not promoted. Every instinct, every lesson from his 20 years of service, screamed at him to dismiss it as the fantasy of an inexperienced analyst. He was about to laugh in her face, to tell her to get back to her station and let the real officers handle the situation, but something stopped him. It was the absolute, unwavering certainty in her voice. There was no hint of a question, no trace of doubt. She wasn't proposing a theory. She was stating a fact. He looked at the main display, at the dying carrier, at the encroaching swarm of enemy torpedoes. His way, the right way, was leading to inevitable disaster. What did he have to lose? The muscle in his jaw clenched. Do it, he bit out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He was giving control of his fleet, even a simulated one, to a junior officer he had openly mocked just minutes before. It was a humiliation, but the alternative was a guaranteed defeat. The moment the word left his lips, Hayes's hands became a whirlwind of activity. It was not the frantic pecking of a typist, but the fluid, controlled motion of a concert pianist. On her screen, lines of code assembled and compiled with breathtaking speed. She was not navigating menus or clicking icons. She was writing the language of the digital battlefield, composing a symphony of disruption. The narrator's voice could describe the scene with reverence. She wasn't just inputting commands. She was bending the very reality of the simulation to her will. The other officers watched, mesmerized. They had never seen anything like it. The air in the room crackled with an energy that was part disbelief, part dawning awe. They were witnessing a master at work, a virtuoso in a discipline most of them barely understood. A small progress bar appeared on the main screen. Data packet injection, it filled with agonizing slowness. 1 second. 2. The torpedo icons were now feet from the USS Vigilance. The entire room held its breath. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight of anticipation. Then, just as the first torpedo was about to impact, the red icons on the screen flickered. They wavered, their projected paths dissolving into nonsense. A new status update flashed beside the submarine Wolfpack. Guidance systems offline, a collective gasp went through the room. It was impossible. It was a miracle. In that precious 30-second window Hayes had promised, the icon for the USS Vigilance flared to life. A flurry of countermeasures deployed, and the great carrier began to turn, slowly, painfully, pulling itself out of the trap. The attack had been broken. The unwinnable scenario had been cracked wide open. Commander Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. His arrogance, his certainty, his entire worldview had been shattered in the space of a heartbeat. He looked from a screen to the quiet woman at the side console. She was already working on the next problem, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. The impossible had just happened, and she looked as if she had simply been balancing a checkbook. The room remained in a state of stunned paralysis. The chaos of moments before had been replaced by a silence so profound it felt louder than the shouting. Officers stared at the main screen, where the USS Vigilance was now establishing a defensive perimeter, its survival a glaring, undeniable fact. They looked at each other, their faces a mixture of confusion, relief, and a deep, unsettling sense of bewilderment. They had been prepared for a lesson in honorable defeat, but they had just received a masterclass in impossible victory. All eyes eventually settled on Lieutenant Commander Hayes. She had not celebrated. She had not even looked up to acknowledge her success. Her focus had already shifted to the Atlantic, where the crippled communications network was still a critical vulnerability. She was methodically dismantling the enemy's cyber defenses, her fingers moving with the same serene precision. She was not just a participant in the exercise, she was its master. It was Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne who finally broke the spell. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate as he descended from the observation gallery, each step echoing in the silent room. He did not look at his son. He did not look at the other commanders. His gaze was fixed entirely on Hayes. He walked past the central podium and stopped directly behind her station. The room watched, holding its breath. This was the moment of reckoning. The Admiral, a living legend whose career spanned from the Cold War to the digital age, leaned down slightly, his voice low but carrying the weight of ultimate authority. "Report, Lieutenant Commander." Hayes stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keyboard for the first time. She turned her head slightly. "Sir, the primary threat to Strike Group Sierra has been neutralized. I have repurposed the enemy's network intrusion as a dedicated, encrypted comms channel. The Vigilance now has full situational awareness. I am currently restoring network integrity to the Atlantic Fleet and tracing the origin point of the cyber attack. I project we can launch a counteroffensive within the next 15 minutes. Her report was delivered in the same flat, technical tone. There was no pride, no hint of "I told you," so it was a simple statement of facts, as if she were reporting on the weather. The Admiral nodded slowly, a deep, contemplative expression on his face. He then turned to the main operations officer. "Lieutenant, bring up Lieutenant Commander Hayes' service record." Main screen, Alpha 1 clearance. A flicker of confusion crossed the officer's face. "Sir, Alpha 1, her file is flagged at the highest classification." The Admiral's eyes were like chips of ice. "I am aware." "Do it," the officer, chastened, complied. The holographic map of the world dissolved, replaced by a stark, black-and-white personnel file. The name, Hayes, Evelyn R. was at the top. And then, the room began to understand. The screen was a litany of achievements so extraordinary, so far beyond the scope of a typical naval career, that they seemed to be from a work of fiction. The data scrolled down the massive screen, each line landing like a hammer blow to the collective ego of the room. The silence of awe was replaced by the silence of shock. The first entry was her education, not just the Naval Academy, but advanced degrees from MIT in cybernetics and quantum computing. Then came her assignments. They were not listed as ship deployments or squadron commands. They were code names, redacted projects that spoke of a world operating in the deepest shadows of national security. Project Chimera, Lead Tactical Architect, Operation Nightshade, Red Team Commander, Pentagon Black Site Delta, Chief Simulation Designer. The last entry made several officers physically flinch. Commander Rex Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. Black Site Delta was a myth, a ghost story whispered about in the highest echo customs of the intelligence community. It was where the most brilliant minds in the military were sent to design and fight the wars of the future, to break every known doctrine and invent new ones in a crucible of constant, high-stakes simulation. To be the chief designer, there meant you weren't just playing the game. You were the one who wrote the rules. Below the assignments was a list of commendations. There were no Purple Hearts or Bronze Stars. Her awards were of a different nature entirely. The National Intelligence Medal of Valor, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the CIA's Director's Award. These were medals awarded not for bravery on a physical battlefield, but for genius on a strategic one. They were honors given to the invisible warriors who saved fleets and armies with lines of code and strokes of keyboard. Then came the final, crushing revelation. Under current assignment, it read, Special Advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Primary duty. Author and overseer of the Prometheus Unbound war game scenario. The room went cold. They hadn't just been in a simulation. They had been in her simulation. The unwinnable scenario, the meat grinder that had humbled them all, was a world of her own creation. She had not just found a loophole. She had been showing them the secret door she herself had built into the maze. The trap she had disarmed was her own signature on the code. She was the architect of their failure and the agent of their salvation. Fleet Admiral Thorne let the information sink in, allowing the full weight of their misjudgment to settle upon the room. He then turned to his son, whose face was a pale mask of disbelief and shame. Commander, the Admiral's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. You asked what a lieutenant commander was doing in your war room. The answer is, she was evaluating whether the senior officers of this fleet still possessed the capacity for innovative thought, or if they had become so blinded by doctrine and arrogance that they could no longer see the battlefield for what it is. He then turned back to Hayes. He did not smile. He did not offer casual praise. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed a sharp, perfect salute. It was not the casual gesture an admiral gives a junior officer. It was the salute of a subordinate to a superior, a profound gesture of respect from a warrior of one generation to a warrior of the next. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, he said, his voice resonating with authority and newfound reverence. Your war game, your command. Please proceed. The story of what happened in the Fleet Command Operations Center that day spread, not like wildfire, but like a change in the tide, slowly at first, then with an inexorable, unstoppable force. It began as hushed whispers in the corridors of the Pentagon, quiet conversations over coffee in the officers' mess, and encrypted emails between ship captains. There was no official report, no public commendation. The events were too classified and the lesson too raw for public dissemination. But the legend of the Hayes Gambit was born. It became a piece of institutional folklore, a cautionary tale passed down from senior officers to ambitious young ensigns. The details would shift with each telling. Sometimes she took control of the enemy's satellites. Other times she supposedly crashed their entire power grid. But the core elements remained the same. The arrogant commander, the impossible scenario, and the quiet, unassuming woman who saw the game differently than anyone else. The tale served as a powerful reminder that the nature of warfare was changing, and that the greatest threats and the greatest talents might not wear the uniforms or the ranks one expected. Commander Rex Thorne underwent a transformation that was both profound and painful. The public humiliation was immense, but it was nothing compared to the private recalibration of his own identity. His entire career had been built on a foundation of certainty, on the belief that the rules and traditions of the Navy were absolute. Hayes had demolished that foundation in under an hour. For a week, he was a ghost, avoiding eye contact, his usual booming confidence replaced by a somber introspection. Then, one evening, he appeared at the entrance to the small, sterile office that had been assigned to Hayes. He didn't knock. He just stood there, his large frame filling the doorway. Hayes looked up from her work, her expression as placid as ever. She waited. Thorne swallowed, his pride warring with a desperate need to understand. How? He finally asked, the single word of surrender. How did you know? The recursive loop in the encryption, that's not in any textbook. It's not in any doctrine. He wasn't apologizing. Not yet. He was asking for knowledge, the first and most crucial step toward earning respect. Hayes leaned back in her chair, considering him for a moment. Her answer, when it came, was not a boast, but a simple, elegant explanation of her philosophy. You saw the enemy cyber attack as a wall, Commander. You were looking for a way to break it down or go around it. I saw it as a language. I just listened to what it was trying to say, and then I taught it a new word. Every system, no matter how complex, has a rhythm, a pattern. If you're quiet enough, you can hear it. The flaw wasn't in their code, it was in their thinking. They assumed we would see the wall, just like you did. She turned back to her screen, the lesson delivered. It was a revelation for Thorn. He had spent his life learning how to fight fleets, ships, and missiles. He had never once considered that the real battle might be against an opponent's assumptions. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander," he said, and the words were heavy with a sincerity he had never shown her before. He then turned and walked away, not as a humbled man, but as a wiser one. The ripples of that day continued to expand, creating lasting change within the institution. The official log of the Prometheus Unbound simulation, once a classified file, was sanitized and repurposed. It became the centerpiece of a new curriculum at the Naval War College in Newport, a mandatory case study for every officer slated for major command. It was officially titled Case Study 734, Asymmetrical Response in a Degraded Cyber Environment. But to the generations of officers who would study it, it was known simply as the Hayes Gambit. Instructors used it to teach the limits of doctrine, the dangers of cognitive bias, and the critical importance of listening to every voice in the room, regardless of the rank on their collar. The symbolic artifact of the event was a single screenshot, printed and framed, that hung on the wall of the Fleet Command Operations Center. It wasn't a picture of Hayes or of the triumphant Admiral. It was a simple, elegant image of the tactical display at the exact moment the enemy torpedoes had gone haywire, their red threat vectors dissolving into harmless, chaotic lines. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "In war, the loudest voice is not always the most correct. The most dangerous assumption is the one you do not know you are making." Commander Rex Thorn's career, which many thought would be derailed by his public humbling, took an unexpected turn. He became a champion for innovation, a vocal advocate for bringing technical specialists and unconventional thinkers into the heart of strategic planning. He sought out the quiet ones, the analysts and coders who were often overlooked, and made sure their voices were heard. He had learned the hard way that the future of the Navy depended not just on its ships, but on the brilliance of the minds that guided them. He never became a buddy to Hayes. Their personalities were too different for that, but a deep and abiding professional respect formed between them. He would often route complex strategic problems to her, and her concise, insightful responses would become the foundation of his new command philosophy. As for Hayes, she remained largely unchanged by her newfound legendary status. She deflected praise, avoided the spotlight, and continued her work in the quiet, focused manner that was her nature. She saw her victory not as a personal triumph, but as a successful data point in her ongoing mission to prepare the Navy for the conflicts of the 21st century. Her reward was not fame, but the knowledge that the institution was learning, evolving. She began mentoring a small, hand-picked group of young officers, men and women who, like her, possessed brilliant minds but didn't fit the traditional warrior mold. She taught them not just cyber warfare or strategic theory, but her core philosophy, that competence was a currency that required no advertisement, that silence could be a position of strength, and that the greatest impact is often made by those who have no interest in taking the credit. Her legacy was not in the single gambit that saved a simulated fleet, but in the new generation of quiet professionals she was cultivating to safeguard the real one. A year passed. The world remained a tense and unpredictable place, but the United States Navy was better prepared to face it. The changes were subtle but significant. The curriculum at Annapolis now included mandatory courses in cyber ethics and unconventional warfare theory, designed by a mysterious advisor known only by the code name Daedalus. High-level strategic meetings, once dominated by the loud voices of veteran captains, now included a mandatory red team analyst, whose job was to challenge every assumption and question every piece of doctrine. The spirit of the Hayes Gambit had been woven into the very fabric of the institution. It was a slow, quiet revolution, a paradigm shift that valued intellect as much as it valued experience, and competence as much as it valued command presence. The story itself had become a modern military myth, a tool for teaching the most important lesson of all: humility. New officers arriving at Fleet Command would inevitably be shown the framed screenshot on the wall. A grizzled senior chief would tell them the tale, his voice low and reverent, emphasizing not the technical brilliance of the move, but the moral of the story. He would talk about the danger of assumptions, the arrogance of rank, and the quiet professional who had humbled an entire room of experts not with a weapon, but with an idea. The legend ensured that every new generation of leaders would think twice before underestimating the quietest person at the table. Commander Rex Thorne, now Captain Thorne, stood on the bridge of his own cruiser, the USS Valiant. It was a real ship this time, patrolling the tense waters of the Persian Gulf. A complex tactical situation was unfolding, a delicate dance of diplomacy and deterrence with a rival power. His officers were shouting reports, offering textbook solutions. The old Thorne would have taken command, barking orders, imposing his will on the situation. But the new Thorne was different. He listened, processed, and then turned to a young lieutenant, a data specialist tucked away at a side console. "What are you seeing, son?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. "What's the data telling us that we're missing?" The young officer, startled to be addressed directly by the captain, pointed to a subtle anomaly in the enemy's communication patterns. It was a tiny detail, almost invisible, but it changed the entire context of the situation. It was the key. Thorne nodded, a flicker of a memory in his eyes. He remembered a quiet woman at a console, seeing what no one else could. He gave the order, an unconventional maneuver based not on doctrine, but on the quiet truth of the data. The crisis was averted peacefully, a victory won without a single shot fired. Half a world away, Evelyn Hayes sat not in a war room, but at a simple desk in a nondescript office building in rural Virginia. Her official title was now Deputy Director of Strategic Development, but her real job had no title. She was the Navy's ghost in the machine, its master architect of future conflict, its ultimate guardian against surprise. She was leading a new unit, a collection of the most brilliant, unconventional minds in the country, tasked with imagining the unimaginable and preparing for wars that had not yet been conceived. Her name was still largely unknown to the public, and even to most of the military. She was a legend to the few who needed to know, and an anonymous civil servant to everyone else. She preferred it that way. Her legacy was not destined for the history books, but for the continued survival and success of the fleet she served. It was a legacy written not in headlines, but in the quiet competence of the officers she had trained, in the wiser decisions of the commanders she had influenced, and in the institutional humility she had helped to instill. The triumph of that day in the war room was not about one woman proving one man wrong. It was about a timeless principle being reaffirmed in the digital age, that true strength is not loud, but quiet, not arrogant, but humble, not demonstrated by the rank on one's shoulders, but by the clarity of one's thinking and the precision of one's actions. It was a testament to the enduring power of the quiet professional, the one who does the work not for glory or recognition, but because the work must be done. The story of Evelyn Hayes became more than a memory. It became a standard, a quiet challenge issued to every person who donned a uniform. It asked them to look past the superficial, to value substance over style, and to remember that the most powerful force in any room is often the calm, disciplined mind that is simply focused on solving the problem. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.